I'm Edie Lush, and I'm here in the Hub Pavilion in Davos. Very pleased to be joined by Salil Shetty. He's the Secretary General of Amnesty International. Thanks for coming along.
Thank you.
You're here to remind companies about their human rights commitments. There's a lot going on in the world. Tell me how it's going.
Well, it's day 2, and we have a few more days to go. I think it's very important. For Amnesty International, historically, we've been very focused on governments, who are the sort of primary duty bearers when it comes to human rights obligations. But in the last decade, corporations have assumed significance like never before. They are much more powerful, and not just in one or two parts of the world. Now they have a global footprint, which is good in some ways. It's generated wealth, it's created more jobs, and all of those good things. But in terms of people who already don't have a voice, communities at the local level, it's caused a lot of challenges, and there are many cases. Amnesty works on a very evidence-based sort of approach. So our research around, say, the work of Shell in Nigeria, or the work of the Vedanta company in eastern India, or the historical work we've done on Bhopal, the Union Carbide and the gas leaks, all of them have shown us that we really have to have quite a sharp focus on the human rights obligations of companies. And as far as communities on the ground are concerned, this distinction as to is it the government or is it the company who is responsible for stopping violations or often dealing with issues of compensation, that distinction is a bit meaningless because they're both equally accountable. So yeah, I mean, and also if you take the issue of the Niger Delta and the Shell issue, we've actually been in the Dutch Parliament yesterday because it is our view that Shell is now also in breach of some of the OECD guidelines. But if you're on the ground in Niger Delta, and if you're a poor woman, who's living there for decades, and you have Shell coming and, exploiting the local natural resources, their biggest challenge really is about not having information and not really knowing what's going on. So one of the main sort of things we are pushing for in Davos is to get away from the historical discussion on voluntary standards and voluntary guidelines to starting to make it much more mandatory. And in the case of Nigeria, I mean, although it's not a very small country and the government is not as weak as, let's say in Democratic Republic of Congo, but even the Nigerian government, it's not that easy to take on Shell. They come with their lawyers. Yeah. So really, it's a question of rebalancing the power. But at the end of the day, Amnesty International is a membership organization with 3 million people standing behind us, and it's our job to speak truth to power, which is what we're doing in Davos.
You spoke about Shell. What about some of your other campaigns? You mentioned Bhopal as well. And how do you distinguish what you do with the governments versus what you do with the company?
So, I mean, the case of, just to stay with Shell on that particular question, we have a situation now where, in our view, national boundaries become a bit meaningless when it comes to global transnational corporations and their business, because although Shell has caused a lot of the problems in Nigeria, at the end of the day, they're a Dutch company and they have to be accountable to the Dutch government and the Dutch citizens as well. And so we are pushing very hard for having these national boundaries become less important and that accountability becomes much more global. But I mean, you asked about other.
How does that work? Does that mean bringing into the International Criminal Court or?
No, I mean, the case of Shell, I mean, there's Dutch laws which they have to be accountable to. So it's not, we're not suggesting sort of universal jurisdiction or the International Criminal Court type model, but certainly they're at least accountable to the Dutch legal system, which hopefully is at least going to be much stronger and clearer than the Nigerian one. So, but I mean, we've just had the big case of Vedanta, which is a UK registered company, a bauxite mining company, and we've been working on that. Indigenous people in eastern India, the Dongria Kond, which is where India is my country, so I'm a bit more familiar with the issues there. And the classic situation, that in theory, all the companies, and this morning I was in a meeting with the CEOs of the major minerals and mining, metals and mining companies, and there's all this discussion about these agreements, about transparency, etc., but there is no disclosure on the ground. So the Dongria Kond, who are amongst the poorest people on the planet, all they see is a 4x4, coming in from Vedanta, and So it's not even a question of not giving information. Very often they're completely misled. They're given wrong information. So in the case of Vedanta in India, what we've done is to work with the communities and the local activists to use the right to information framework which the government of India has created. Because at the end of the day, if the communities and the people on the ground don't have information, they're never going to be able to claim their rights. So we are saying it's no more a question of transparency or voluntary types of information sharing. Disclosure of information has to be mandatory, and it has to be the disclosure must happen in a way that the Dongriya Kon can understand. You can't throw an email
Legal documents or, right.
or to a community who doesn't even have electricity. So it's having information conveyed to people in a way that makes sense to them, in a way that they can engage with these corporations and with the governments. I must say, very often, we are making this distinction between governments and corporations, but on the ground, they actually work very closely together. Because governments often have the same interests as the corporations, which is to get additional tax revenues. Companies want more profits, but what about the human rights of the people? And you don't want more and more Tunisias happening. At the end of the day, if people don't have economic freedom and political freedom, you're going to get rebellion. And that's really not where we want to go.
Exactly. So, thanks very much for stopping by the Hub Pavilion here in Davos, and I'm Edie Lush.